apparently there's some kind of great drama going on in the Catholic Church at the moment because your Pope is what, a giant progressive?
Yeah, I think drama is an understatement. The Pope has been known to make off-the-cuff remarks that have been highly embarrassing, especially to people on the non-progressive side of the aisle. But recently, it's sort of taken a turn into well, I mean, it looks like a palace coup or some nefarious activity is going on inside the Catholic Church because I don't want to say that the church is in crisis, but a lot of people are saying the church is in crisis. And it's hard to know really where it begins, I guess. But I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Okay,
So,
give me a second. I'm actually just going to check that this has been recording properly. Okay. Um, right. So let's start with the thing that I found most alarming. Uh, it was the point that was it March 2018, where the Guardian published an article called "Vatican Scrambles After Pope Appears to Deny the Existence of Hell." I mean,
well,
that seems like quite the gaffe.
gaff. But I mean, I guess, this is not what's currently tearing the Catholic Church apart. But what the Pope has done, this is the current Pope Francis, who was brought in under extraordinary circumstances due to the previous pontiff resigning, Pope Benedict XVI. And what Francis is sort of wont to do is to meet with shady Italian journalists who don't take notes or to make comments from an airplane seat when he's flying back to some youth conference that seem like they're overturning official Catholic doctrine. But if you look into it, they're not. Like, and this is sort of so it feels like he's playing a giant mind game with, well, I
Hello. Oh, I've got my internet. Oh my goodness. Is it my internet or his?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Ah, right. Yeah, I can hear you now. All of a sudden, I don't know what happened there.
Great. What was the last thing you heard from me?
Playing some kind of mind game.
Oh yeah, so he's playing a mind game with the people who run the Congregation on the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the thing that we renamed the Inquisition to in the 20th century.
Right.
And uh, this creates a public perception of Francis that is very different from what the church teaches.
So
Bunch of red
what is
lines.
it
Yeah.
that's tearing things apart then? If not his, I mean, like, isn't that a big deal though? I would have thought that if one believed in these things, like as prescribed, then I mean, surely that would have caused loads of just regular people to start questioning. Why would he say that?
It's horribly embarrassing for the church. I don't want to underplay that.
Right.
But the thing is, it's not a crisis moment because we've had very bad popes in the past. We had,
Right. Okay.
the what is that Italian family, the Borgia popes. We've had a number of really, really bad people in the office who've said and done horrible things. But as long as Francis's statements or even actions don't intersect directly with the operation of the church in a few key areas, specifically around doctrine, they don't actually threaten the full apparatus of the church. And if he insinuates that hell doesn't exist to an Italian journalist and there's no record of him saying anything directly, then while horribly embarrassing for Catholics, it is not.
Oh my god, is it Discord or is it me? Folks, let me know because I have no idea. But goddamn.
Or not allegations. I'm not so sure if they're allegations, but Cardinal McCarrick, a very high-ranking cardinal, as high as you go, it's where you actually can vote in the College of Cardinals for the next pope.
Mm-hmm.
He was revealed to be a serial sexual predator. And it was revealed that his predations, which usually targeted men who were over the age of consent, had tracked down several times to... And this caused an explosion because, well, the Catholic Church has been dealing with the sex abuse crisis for quite some time now.
Hmm.
This has hit up the hierarchy. And subsequent revelations coming from Vatican insiders, very, very credible ones, coming from someone called Cardinal, oh, I should say Archbishop Cardinal Vigano, has said that, well, his allegations are that McCarrick was known to be a sexual predator by none other than Francis and Benedict. That Benedict essentially tried to give him a soft exile, essentially trying to shove him into the corner in secret.
Mm-hmm.
To Vigano, when Francis came into the pontificate, because McCarrick was a huge supporter of progressive causes, he rehabilitated McCarrick, even though he was a known sexual predator.
No way.
Allegations are tearing the church apart, as you might well imagine.
Jesus.
Because this, yeah, oh, yeah, okay. So,
that's insane. Sorry.
Archbishop Cardinal Vigano is he is the nuncio. He's basically I think it's nuncio is his title. It's basically an ambassador to the United States. He's a very highly placed person. Of course, every one of the progressive cardinals has now immediately attacked him, and all the conservatives have rallied around Vigano. If what he says is true, Pope Francis is guilty potentially of criminal allegations. Not that anyone could charge him because he's the head of a country. Yeah. Trying to charge Francis would be like trying to charge, Kim Jong-un or whatever. You're never going to do it. The Vatican's its own country. But it does cause a credibility crisis, especially since these are all rumors, right? But all we have is Vigano's testimony, right? It's rumored that Francis did this. And it's also rumored by Vigano that the people that a lot of the archbishops and cardinals that Francis has been appointing, covering up for people, covering up for sexual abusers in the church, and that essentially Francis has been ending investigations against people who have been, well, he didn't say, Vigano did not insinuate from my understanding of the document that this was quid pro quo, but that investigations into abusive had essentially been terminated by Francis's approval. And this to essentially a collection of people who are trying to use the Catholic Church as a political body, and they're turning a blind eye to people potentially to curry favor politically.
Yeah, because I wanted to nail you down on that. So you are saying that there is a distinct progressive bias that is actually affecting this?
Francis is a progressive, sure. That's for sure.
But is he effectively subtly pardoning other progressives who have been accused of this, but not conservatives? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, now I'm getting into rumors, because the thing is that all we have to go on now is rumors.
Right.
What isn't a rumor is that Cardinal McCarrick, well, I mean, again, no one knows the exact truth, but it's pretty uncontroversial that he's a serial abuser. What's uncontroversial is that he is a cardinal and that he has power in the church and that he has a lot of allies.
Right.
Now, the statements is essentially, how far does this go up? Vigano is what he's directly accusing Pope Francis of nixing Vigano's censoring, and then also nixing investigations into other people.
So how?
So what?
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I was going to say the thing is with the church at this stage is that it's not clear to me that this is intellectually involved in committing crimes. I would think that he was a patsy. That a lot of these people and a lot of these cardinals that are accused of malfeasance were the ones politically pushing for him to get into the papacy when he was elected under those very, very special circumstances. And so I would imagine that he is essentially just someone who didn't pay the right amount of attention to this particular problem.
Man, this is colossal.
People understand him. Pardon me?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so how wide-ranging are we expecting this to be? 'Cause, I mean, this is the very highest levels of the Catholic Church, right?
This is the highest levels. Well, this is the thing, Sargon, and I'm going to kind of be very unpolitically correct.
Mm-hmm.
What seems to me to be the case, and this is my opinion, and there's going to be progressive Catholics that are going to call me out on this.
Right.
What I think is going on is this. There are a lot of high-ranking and cardinals who are homosexual and that are living sexual lifestyles. But
sorry
yeah,
to interrupt, and it's a real pain, but you keep cutting out on mine, and I'm wondering
God, okay.
if I've done
I could try
something.
to. Yeah, I'm sorry if that's coming out. I can try to switch my application
Probably my fault. I'm just
that
checking
we
see if there's
can.
anything I can.
Um,
Right, sorry. There's a thing called priority
if
speaker
I
that
had this.
I haven't got on for some reason, so I'm just turning that on, and hopefully that um,
Uh,
does what I want it
I
to
want.
do.
Yeah, I'm hoping that maybe I can move my microphone a little bit closer. I only have the browser, unfortunately, for this call.
Right, okay, no problem. But if have you moved it closer there? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just adjusting the microphone distance.
Right. Talking at your end, it's
It
almost
could be
always your
not
end.
picking up.
I don't know what it is, but like it cuts off like just briefly before and at the very end of each sentence, so it kind of ruins the context of everything you're saying.
Here, um, I could try to change machines, but that might be a little bit
Let,
disruptive to a stream if we're doing it live.
let's try it now because I changed one of the settings that might help. Um, so yeah,
Maybe.
could you repeat that last bit again? Sorry about that.
I think I lost it a little bit, but what my
Well,
understanding
I'd
is
asked how
that
wide ranging it was, since it seemed to be right at the very top. It could have been a narrow sort of a group of people, right?
it's hard to say. What apparently is the case is that there's a large number of cardinals who are progressive and who have vested interest, sure, that this sexual activities of certain priests and high-ranking bishops are not looked into too carefully. What I imagine this is that McCarrick's were known for a long time, but were known to be mainly targeted at non-minors. A lot of the more progressive cardinals decided to turn a blind eye with the understanding that this abuse, and it's more like, I guess it's more, I still think it's abuse, even though it might be more like Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, I know. I see what you're saying, but like, I'm not even going to begin to differentiate. It's abuse.
And then because of that, they ended up in a situation where they essentially had to apologize for a person who turned out later to be a horrific abuser.
Hmm.
I think this really. I mean, I'm going to go full Catholic here. I mean, this is heresy. The
Wow.
problem is there's a bunch of people inside the church that are trying to open up a space for leaders that do not believe in the doctrines that the church teaches,
Hmm.
or for sexual reasons or for non-sexual reasons. And because of this, there is a group of people inside the church who have a vested interest for uncovering for other bishops the line and are not orthodox in their beliefs.
So
I don't
how?
want to sound like a Warhammer 40K Space Marine, but that's basically what half the Catholics sound like these days.
Well,
The
yeah,
conservative ones, at
I don't
least.
find that at all surprising. I mean, like, that's what Catholic beliefs are like. So I mean, the Warhammer was like, it poached a lot of that from the Catholic Church. That sort of imagery for that reason. But is this some sort of wide ranging thing within the Catholic Church? I guess, like, I suppose, I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't know anything about the Catholic Church really, and so I imagine it's got like classes of people who are like the intellectuals of the communities that spend
Yes.
time discussing the dogma, obviously. And
Do you mind me going into the history a little bit?
sure, please.
Basically, the Catholic Church has gone through its history with a number of councils. So there's obviously the Council of Nicaea that kicked the doctrine
Hmm.
off. The Council of Trent was the post-Reformation one that created the Catholic Church as we know it after the Middle Ages.
Hmm.
And then starting into the 20th century, really starting in the 19th century, there was a feeling that the Catholic Church needed to confront modernity. That being the society that focuses on individualism and focuses on consumerism and focuses on other aspects of liberty and equality as its primary organizing source, as opposed to metaphysical concepts like virtue. And this was kicked off by the First Vatican Council, which was brought about by Italian independence, I think. But going into the 20th century, the Catholic Church was very much against modernity. It was against liberalism, and it was like, we're not going to participate in this.
Mm-hmm.
Starting really, and I think this was kicked off largely due to the prominence of American Catholics who had subsequently to assimilating into WASP culture, had found a way of marrying Catholicism with liberalism and with modern democratic societies in a way that a lot of other Catholics thought was ultimately incompatible. And this brought about a council called Vatican II, or the Second Vatican Council, in which the church tried to come to some kind of peace with modern developments in society. And a massive change in the church. Basically, Latin was replaced with a vernacular. A lot of changes with how the liturgy was set up, and a lot of changes with how the Vatican postured itself relative to other forms of Christianity. A lot of olive branches to Protestantism and other nations. And a lot of people thought this was a terrible idea. Now, Vatican II was a very particular cut, right?
Yeah.
It was essentially a cut so that none of the doctrines the church said, but the doctrines being the core teachings, but a lot of the forms and a lot of the presentation would change. I believe this probably was when we renamed the Inquisition to the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. We're putting on a more friendly image, one that's more friendly to modernity, but we're not changing any of our attitudes about what's heresy and what's not, and what's the actual doctrine. So unfortunately, this created two camps. One camp of people, actually three, if you want to get down to it. But the first camp of people was like, modernity is terrible. This whole Vatican II is atrocious. We need to get away with it. They started making schismatic, highly conservative traditional forms of Catholicism that were still adherent to the Latin Mass and everything essentially as it was depicted by Trent. The other one was the group of Catholics who were very well funded, who wanted Catholicism to go full-bore progressive Protestantism, to essentially be like modern Episcopalians, where you've got women priests and, liturgical dancing and God as a woman. And there are a lot of people in the Catholic Church that saw the Vatican II not as we're going to put a more modern face on the doctrine that we've never changed, to, okay, everything's up for grabs, let's go. So this process was started by John the 23rd, and it was continued by Paul the 6th. And what happened is that during the 60s, this started in the 50s and it tracked into the 60s, the Catholic Church seemed to give off the message that anything was up for grabs. Whole orders of nuns and priests abandoned celibacy. They stopped wearing the habits. The number of religious in this country dropped like a stone. I know, going out in Seattle, I go to the old graveyards every now and again to lay flowers on the tombs of priests. That's sort of an exercise our parish does. Mm. We have got a group of priests that do this. And you just go into the cemetery and there are oceans of nun graves, or graves of sisters. Like, you can't, and you're like, there are hundreds of times the amount of people here than there are active in the city right now. And the city's tripled in size. So it was a devastation of the old religious orders because people said everything is up for grabs. Then in 1968, Paul VI wrote a very controversial document called Humanae Vitae, which said control is still bad, heresy is still bad, the sexual revolution has to be opposed. We're not going any further to the left. And this created a very big break with a lot of people in the Catholic Church thinking that the progressive direction the church was going in was
God damn it! This must be my internet connection.
Yeah.
Sorry, you'll be halfway through a sentence and they'll just cut out, and I'm just like grinding my teeth. God damn.
I can see if
I'm sure it's on my end, man. I mean, it's bound to be. That's my kind of luck.
Maybe I can repeat whatever I was going to say.
Yeah, I can edit it. It's fine.
That's
I could. I'm terrible.
Maybe the more egregious pauses you can add. I hope it's recording at least to some extent.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I caught most of it right up until the very end, so I kind of missed the climax there.
Well, I guess Paul VI Paul VI writes Humanae Vitae, which is a statement essentially that the sexual revolution will not be cooperated with in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. You're going
No
too far to the
abortion, no
left.
birth
I heard
control.
that bit.
The church is plunged into chaos in a war between the conservatives, and there's at this time two types of conservatives. There are the conservatives who are we hate Vatican II. The conservatives who are like, we like Vatican II, but only on the level that we originally specified, aka the changes that don't interfere with doctrine. And then the progressives who wanted Vatican II to be the first step of a total progressivization of the Catholic Church. Now, this chaotic period between essentially the 60s and the 80s kicked off what I think is the high point of the Catholic sex abuse crisis, because a lot of people entering the clergy were entering for very nefarious purposes, and with the understanding that celibacy requirements probably would not be maintained going on into the future. And because of that, a lot of people ended up in priesthoods that they really shouldn't have been in. Now, in the 80s, something happened, and a lot of Catholics thought it was the solution, and that was John Paul II. John Paul II was a figure of reconciliation for the church. He essentially laid out exactly how the church would go forward with Vatican II. We're going to try to accommodate modernity as much as we can, insofar as it does not interfere with our actual doctrines. Vatican II is the way of the church, but we will be accepting of people who want to do Latin Mass on the side. We're not going to interfere with that. And to the extent that we can bring everyone in, this is the rules, right? It's essentially middle. It's sort of, I hesitate to say it's like neoconservative, but it is middle of the road conservative Catholicism.
Yeah.
And most Catholics, from my point of view, saw John Paul II and later on Benedict XVI as the way forward for the church. Only way that the church could go forward. The progressivization was death by another name, and obviously people felt that the hyper traditionalism was not suited for the 21st century or the 20th century when John Paul II was in.
Makes sense. Just sort of like a modern conservative approach, trying to preserve the beliefs as much as possible, but giving ground where politically necessary.
Exactly. That's precisely, and of course,
Perfectly
John Paul
reasonable.
II's, it's perfectly reasonable. And his opposition to communism and totalitarianism made him a person that was very hard Catholics to criticize. I know that I think, was it Christopher Hitchens? I think he had some nice things to say about Pope John Paul II, largely because of Pope John Paul II's anti-totalitarian beliefs, owing probably to the Pope being Polish at the time and having experienced communism firsthand and being an opponent of further totalitarian moves. And this created in the minds of modern Catholics what a feeling of complacency, a feeling like, look, all of those crazy progressives and those crazy traditionalists, like the progressives are going to die off. They're not having more children and they're not becoming priests. And the traditionalists, eventually they'll get tired of having 2.5-hour Latin masses and come to our 1 hour and 20-minute mass in the language that they actually can speak. And this is just going to be the solution going forward. This was...
Sorry, how long ago was it? Oh, God damn it. What is going on? God, maybe we should try Skype.
That might. Well, can you piece them together?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I can piece them together. What I'll do is I'll just call you on Skype. But that means that everyone won't be able to hear.
I could try switching machines if you can cut this part out.
Yeah, I can just pause it a sec. Okay, I've resumed the recording. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, can you go
I'm
over the
last
last
like
minute or so of the previous one, and I'll be able to.
So we were talking about. So the election of Pope Francis, I think, was the thing we were talking about.
That's right. Yeah.
So Pope Benedict XVI was the Pope after John Paul II, and he really was a continuation of John Paul II in a slightly more conservative direction. Although Pope John Paul II was a conservative, but Pope John Paul II was much more charismatic. And I mean, just look at their faces. I mean, Benedict looked like
Palpatine.
Emperor Palpatine.
Yeah.
Everyone makes that joke, right? I mean, he looks like an evil German Pope, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure that didn't go over well. I mean, we went from a Polish Pope who was this stalwart against communism to a German Pope who had been in the Hitler Youth, even though their opinions on almost everything didn't change very much, right?
Yeah.
And it's not Pope Benedict's fault for getting recruited into the Hitler Youth when he was 12, right? But still, I mean, the imagistics, right?
Exactly, yeah. It doesn't look good.
And so what started happening the Vatican has a consistent problem with keeping on message. And what started happening with Pope Benedict XVI was that there kept on being these uncomfortable leaks going out of the Vatican that were mysteriously carried out. And I don't want to sort of name names, but there were just some strange things going on towards the tail end of Pope Benedict XVI's pontificate. Nothing that really indicted the pontiff himself. As far as I could tell, none of them were huge scandals from the secular perspective. But then out of nowhere in 2013, for the first time in 600 years, I think it's 800 years actually, Benedict resigns, a living pope resigns, and then there's another conclave to determine a successor. Just to keep in mind how long ago this has been since this has happened, the last pope to resign was Saint Celestine. And Saint Celestine was the pope of Dante's time, like from the Divine Comedy.
Yeah.
And Dante had, I think this is a little bit ironic, but Dante had it out for the pope that directly replaced him, called Pope Boniface. And he strings the Inferno with colorful imagery of what will happen to Boniface when he finally dies.
Why did Benedict resign then?
Nobody knows.
Right.
Nobody knows. It is a total mystery, and it has invited all sorts of conspiracies. Okay. It's invited also that after Benedict dies, instantaneously they come out with a uniform decision of who the next pope is for a candidate that nobody knew about. Well, I mean, no one was taking seriously beforehand, and usually it takes them 3 or 4 times to elect somebody in one of these conclave meetings. This happened instantly. First shot, nailed it.
Okay,
right?
okay. Hang on.
No one expected.
Give me the best conspiracy theory.
Okay, this is a conspiracy theory. Everyone, okay.
I'm not saying that you believe it. Just what is the conspiracy theory that I don't know?
I do kind of believe it, but I believe it, but I can't support it. Yeah. And my best guess is that essentially the progressive cardinals from the Second Vatican Council realized that their power was reigning inside the church because there had been 2 generations of moderate conservative pontiffs who were electing cardinals, and they realized that if the things continued the way they were, they would essentially be exposed. Well, originally I thought they'd essentially just go out of power, but now I'm wondering if they weren't fearing exposure for other malfeasance. And they realized that this kept on going on, they'd eventually get the Inquisition would be coming for them, maybe even literally. Yeah. and they decide that this is the only time they can seize power, and they start by smuggling out embarrassing secrets of the papacy through the Vatican, who they have connections to, and then they come to Benedict saying, "We're going to cause a schism in the church if you don't immediately resign." And then when Benedict resigns, all of the progressives are lined up behind one candidate and one candidate only, Cardinal Bergoglio from Argentina, who is then almost unknown of. All the conservatives have divided votes between half a dozen other candidates, and so it's a divided conservative vote versus a consolidated progressive vote against Bergoglio, and that carries the day in a Vatican conclave that's called hastily together, and that people are entering into with the intention of trying to get over as fast as possible to minimize embarrassment to the church. So it's a perfectly executed I don't want to say coup, but a perfectly executed political maneuver in order to get a friendly voice into the seat of St. Peter before the jaws of victory claps down around progressive Catholicism forever.
I think
That's my conspiracy theory.
that I mean, if that were to be true, that sounds like you could describe it as some sort of soft coup, because
it's a soft coup.
Yeah, I mean that's that's exercising illegitimate political power, threatening him with an ultimatum. So,
yeah, I don't know why, because it's been what? It's been 5 years. There's been people who are like, oh, it's because of his health. Benedict's in fine health still. No, oh, it's because he has a scandal. Well, really? I haven't seen any scandal coming out of Benedict. His life has been very, very well documented. He was famous even as a young man and constantly in the spotlight writing stuff. I mean, the possibility of a scandal that hasn't come out yet strikes me as not likely. And then you have the fact that the progressives were so unified and the conservatives so disorganized that it seemed like they saw it coming and nobody else did. So I'm putting all these facts together.
So just to help reinforce this point, so can we talk about how progressive? Which one is this? Francis? Yeah, Pope Francis. Yeah, let's talk about how progressive he is, because I am constantly revolted by some of the stuff that comes out of his mouth.
Well, it's strange because you're probably not going to be revolted by the same things I'm revolted on. It'll be probably really funny.
Probably not, but I mean, I can appreciate how the worldview is from the Catholic perspective. That's why the denying the existence of hell, I was like, well, okay, that's kind of core. You do not, Yeah,
anyway. if that was an ex cathedra statement, that would be a schism instantly.
Yeah, right. So I mean,
it wasn't.
Well, I know, but I mean, you're dancing close.
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing, you madman?
Close to hell with a lot of other pontiffs. I didn't mention the Borgia. The Borgia popes are pretty bad too.
Yeah, but that seems like an elementary thing that you. Okay, I'm not going to start restructuring the universe.
All we have to be is better than the Medici's, and then we're.
So what I mean, I've got a bunch of links that I'll put in the description of the video that we'll put up.
I'm laughing so I don't cry. Folks.
I know, right? Pope says Quran is a book of peace and Islam is a peaceful religion. How can he say
that? I mean, the Pope is not. I know this is the line you're going to get from Catholics, but it is correct. The Pope is not an expert on science. He's not an expert on history. He could say the moon was made out of green cheese. I'm sure there have been popes that have said the moon's made out of green cheese, right? Yeah. His authority in terms of his infallibility and role as a pontiff extends only to the doctrine and only to statements made ex cathedra about the doctrine.
God, that's lucky.
And in no other regards.
That's very lucky, because otherwise it might sound like he's saying that Islam did nothing wrong.
This is one thing. Oh yeah, well that's embarrassing. But the thing that almost before this current scandal took place, the last thing that was almost tore the church apart was that when Francis got in, and he started making these embarrassing statements like, "Who am I to judge?" or "Catholics need to stop getting so bent out of shape about abortion." After that, he went in on a synod, which is kind of like a mini council, concerning specifically communion for people who are divorced and remarried. Now, this has been a long time project of one particular cardinal called Cardinal Casper from Germany. And this synod came very, very close to revising how Catholics treated divorce and being in good standing with the church. If you're a Catholic and you get divorced, you cannot take communion, the main sacrament, while you're remarried to another spouse.
God, I went to the Vatican recently. I went into this into the big cathedral there, and in there's a side bit where people go in to pray, and you're only meant to go in there if you're a Catholic, but I just walked in there anyway because I'm a fucking heretic, and I can't believe I didn't burst into flames now. You're making me feel like a sinner. It's incredible.
well, that probably is. Yeah, that probably is the tabernacle area where the sacrament is housed when it's not being distributed, right? Which I guess, I don't know. To my mind, there's something in doctrine that says that Protestants or atheists can't go before the sacrament, but usually the sacrament's only intended to be consumed by people who are actually in good standing with the church, which means you can't be divorced and remarried. And you as an English person know that the Catholic Church has fought several wars against England in particular over this very point.
One or two.
And well, so it seemed like Pope Francis was drafting a giant apology letter to King Henry VIII in the middle of revising what was in essence a core doctrine of the Catholic Church. Now, of course, Cardinal Casper has all sorts of explanations how this isn't actually a violation of the doctrine by all this kind of Byzantine circuitous explanations of how legalistically it doesn't apply in these circumstances. But in all practical senses, if that process had gone through, the Catholic Church would have been in possession of a doctrine that it was not actively upholding in its practice, which to my mind would have been borderline unacceptable for a church to do.
I found the open borders of pro-life argument from Francis quite amusing, given how Vatican City is surrounded by a wall.
Yeah, Pope. It's so funny, right, Sargon? Because the things that are objectionable to Catholics are always going to be around the doctrine.
I know. None of this is Catholic objection.
Like he can be there have been idiot popes. There have been popes who probably have had like 75 IQs.
Sure.
Like there have been idiot popes. But the thing is that the Catholic Church's claims don't center around the church being the Pope being smart. They don't center around the Pope being
the politics of it or anything like that. I mean, none of this is a question of dogma. This is all a question of progressive politics. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess the thing is right now is that it feels from a Catholic point of view that the church is being subverted and by progressives.
Yeah.
And that the Pope, and I'll tell you, do you know what actually, I was an apologist for Francis, even though I'm much more on the John Paul II side.
Mm-hmm.
Not much more, I just am. But I was an apologist for Pope Francis, going like, he's just trying to be compassionate. Mm-hmm. He's just trying to go as far up to doctrine as he can with mercy until doctrine kicks in. Like, this is what we've always done. This is what John Paul II did. You give as much leeway as you possibly can, and then you have to draw the line at doctrine because that's the command, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that changed in a very particular instance when Pope Francis essentially said to the Chinese Communist Party, you can appoint bishops, or you can essentially take the bishops that you approve and put them in place of the bishops that were originally put there by the church leadership. This, to my mind, is a betrayal. The Communist Party is antithetical to the Catholic Church in a variety of ways, and giving them veto power over the appointment of bishops is something that... this is essentially what Thomas Becket died for in England, in Canterbury, right?
Yeah, I know. Rid me of this troublesome
The Catholic
priest.
Church has gone to the wall again and again against king after king after king on just this issue, and it's certainly in his purview. It's certainly in the Pope's power to make this concession. It's not something that goes against doctrine. It doesn't technically bring the church into schism, but to me, it expresses a political reality that the reason why Pope Francis is doing this is simply he's obeying the commands of higher global powers, and he's getting pushed around by them. Not that he's operating under. Alex Jones needs to be a cardinal, but yeah.
But it kind of is, though, isn't it? I mean, in a broad way.
Is this mercy, or is this is what the global powers want, and Pope Francis is this someone who blows in the wind, right? He blows in the wind when he's pressured by these other cardinals who are waiting in the wing. He blows in the wind when the Communist Party pushes in his direction. I mean, that made me furious, and I'm still not so sure how I integrate this with apologizing for this Pope's stupid statements on airplanes. I'll give you another one, Sargon. Do you know what he said? Pope Francis was confronted with Vigano's letter, with Vigano's letter saying that he had explicitly covered up, or not covered up, but essentially that Cardinal McCarrick, the person who's I don't know if he's convicted, but that we pretty much know is a serial abuser, that this person was censured by Pope Benedict, and that Francis essentially undid that and rehabilitated him. When those accusations were brought to Pope Francis said, I don't have anything to say about it. Everything that's said has been said. Make up your own mind, and didn't say anything about it. And the next day, his functionaries came forward and said the Pope had a lot of important business to do regarding global warming and plastics in oceans.
Holy shit!
Like,
what does the Pope have to do with any of that? What?
Precisely. I'm like, I didn't. He was not elected as our environmental consultant. And you know what it reminded me? It reminded me of the Harvey Weinstein thing.
Yeah.
When Harvey Weinstein was like, he got caught with the abuse thing, and he's like, "Well, guys, I'm actually about to make a documentary on the abuses of the NRA."
Oh my God! I've actually that was going to lead on to the next thing I was going to bring up. Apparently, the Pope has said that gun owners can't call themselves Christian anymore. What the fuck? I mean, Jesus Christ! He's not even saying Catholic.
The statements are very, very embarrassing.
I love the way that he's basically takfiring the Crusaders.
Well, and that this is kind of strange. I'm about to dive into church politics anymore. A lot of this feels like attitudes that come out of the specific order that Francis comes from. So there are orders of different priests inside the Catholic Church, and they all have different reputations and different gifts that they try to augment. And Pope Francis comes from the Jesuit order, which was developed by a crusading knight. So the Jesuits were a very late order developed by a crusading Spanish knight that renounced violence and became the founder of the Loyola. That's his name. He became a founder of the Society of Jesus, aka the Jesuits. And this person, the Jesuits were a very intellectual order, and they were originally tasked with confronting Protestantism and tamping down the heresy of Protestantism, which they totally failed at doing. And now, I don't want to run down the Jesuit order. They were amazing. Most of the martyrs in America and in Japan were all Jesuits. The ones who the samurai crucified were all Jesuits. The one who's the samurai tortured were all Jesuits. And so this had a storied history, but the Jesuits were always, of the intellectual branches of the church, they were always kind of the rivals of the Dominicans, who were the original people who ran the Inquisition against medieval heresies and were much more successful. And since the 20th century, the Jesuits have been known as becoming successively more and more and more progressive, while their other rival orders like the Dominicans have remained much more orthodox. And so there are numerous priests and bishops that come from the Jesuit order who more traditionalist Catholics have accused of falling into heresy. And this has given the order the reputation of being, I don't know how to put this, tainted by heresy. That sounds, again, it sounds like something from Warhammer.
I love the fact that you have to use the phrase "tainted by heresy." I'm just,
oh God,
I don't want to sound like a dick,
nut, though.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I don't want to sound like a dick, but I am listening to this and I'm sort of thinking, there are parts where I'm like, is he pulling my leg, right, about things? Not because I just can't. I don't know enough about the Catholic Church and the inner workings to be able to corroborate any of this. Like, I'm very familiar with a lot of the things you're talking about, but not in the sort of politically active way that you're talking. I'm used to reading about them like out of context when reading about the historical life of a particular figure or something like that, or a particular event. You see aspects of it, and so you don't really understand the full inner machinations. And so you're saying all this stuff, and I'm like, okay, well, it sounds plausible, but it also could be that I'm being totally taken for a ride, and I wouldn't know.
Well, okay, I am giving you definitely the high politic view of this, right?
And then, no, like, that's fine. That's fine.
There's a day-to-day. I mean, for people who are looking at the Catholic Church, like ordinary parishioners, this is not our concern, right? Sure. This is how the church governs itself from the pontiff's seat. Yeah. If you're a parishioner or a lay person like me, the focus is your own spiritual development, the sacraments, confession, prayer, spiritual growth. And there are heroes of the church. There are, in my opinion, great saints operating in the church, totally orthodox, and there are great parishes that are heroic. I feel, however, that this last scandal has made it impossible for ordinary parishioners who care about the future of their church not to look into this writhing cauldron and ask themselves, why are there so many Jesuits going around preaching heresy? Why are our seminaries essential? Why are people teaching our seminaries preaching heresy? Why are some orders more orthodox than others? Why are some cardinals essentially acting like they care more about plastics in the ocean than they are about actually teaching the faith? And, maybe, well, again, I think that, to my mind, there needs to be a cleaning up of the church hierarchy. And maybe, I'm sure Catholics are going to say, oh, how could you talk to a non-Catholic about this? You're giving us a bad name. This isn't the core of the church's spirituality. But if the church intrudes upon its own doctrines, I think that the political realities of the church immediately become very, very pressing for people who are trying to follow the doctrines in their spiritual life.
So, along with the unironic heresy, I assume that you have what I guess we could call alt-Catholicism.
Well, yes. So
just to be clear, it sounds like you're kind of becoming the Catholic Tommy Robinson.
Well, so like I said before, there are three parties. The people who are the old Latin Mass Catholics, they're still out there. They're still, and there's some that are heretical. There are two orders that are Latin Massers. There's the Fraternal Society of St. Peter, which are the largest order, to my knowledge, of the anti-Vatican II Catholics who are still in communion with the Church. And then there is the Society of Pope Pius X, which is the Latin Mass Catholics who are loyal but have been excommunicated.
Right.
They're loyal knights of the Church that have been excommunicated because they appointed.
Right, that cutout is definitely me. God damn it.
They're automatically excommunicated, even though they claim to be loyal to the church that's excommunicated them. And so this creates a situation where a lot of people are lobbying to bring them back in. Now, if you were to say all Catholicism, I would immediately think of those people, of the people who are to the right of Pope John Paul II. To me, Pope John Paul II and his conservative but merciful approach is the mainstream church. That is a potential future for the church. Another potential future is that we go back to undo Vatican II. But I still maintain that there is no future for the church that is progressive. The progressives will drive the church into the ground the same way that they've driven everything else into the ground that they've gotten control of, and the places that you talk about periodically on your channel.
I completely agree. I don't think we should be surprised in any way, shape, or form that there is yet another hierarchy that the progressives have co-opted. This is what they do. They do this all the time, everywhere, in every community, in every fucking culture, in every country that they exist in. They do this. So yeah, I can completely believe that they've done it to the Catholic Church, and yeah, I genuinely think they're an existential threat to the Catholic Church. I mean, to have Pope Francis praise a religion that waged war on Catholicism for hundreds of years as a religion of peace is insane. Literally.
Yeah, I'm groaning about that one too.
Yeah, but Islam is a good religion, and it's just like, but it's not just like the internal politics of it. It's how it looks from the outside. You know, if it makes the Catholic Church look weak and subservient to Islam, when it should be a moral bulwark against it.
What's so strange is that the Catholic Church, it has orders of knights that have essentially, for huge swaths of their history, been dedicated to keeping Islam out of Europe. What comes to mind immediately is the Knights of Malta.
Yeah, the orders of knights that were literally just created to fight Muslims.
They're still there too.
Yeah,
well, the Knights of Malta is, they're created to be educators and doctors, and then they were converted into an anti-Islam squad for a few hundred years, and then converted away from that again.
Yeah, I went to Rhodes, and they had before they were the Knights of Malta, they were the Knights of Rhodes, and they'd come from Cyprus before that or something. But
they were known as the Hospitaller in the Middle Ages.
Yeah. But these people have been fighting Muslims for hundreds of years, and that was their role. And Like, what is going on? Why? I mean, I'd say why. We know why. It's because he's a progressive. This is the progressive thing to do.
Okay, you cut out there a little bit, Sargon, but
sorry, yeah, just because we know why he's doing it. He's a progressive, and for some reason, it's progressive to submit to Islam. Weirdly,
well, this problem exists throughout the church, and it's not like it's just the Pope. The Pope, I don't think actually he's when you get him on a good day, he's perfectly orthodox. What I think the Pope is just he just blows in the wind, right? And the winds are blowing to the left, or the people that are immediately around the Pope and who brought him in are blowing in that direction. They're either part of this group of cardinals who seems to be covering for something, and I say seems to because the rumors have not been proven yet, right? Oh. I want to be very clear. What seems to be happening is that this is a group of cardinals in the Vatican that are covering up for these things, and it seems that they have Pope Francis's ear. But I still maintain that Pope Francis is a good man who's just perhaps too weak for the office and the burden that's been hoisted upon his shoulders.
Are you saying
it's quite possible?
Hang on.
It's quite possible that so go ahead.
He's the Catholic Bernie Sanders, is what you're saying.
Well, I guess I sort of imagine him more like King Theoden, like with the worm tongue and but I don't know if Bernie Sanders was some like kind Bernie of Sanders. Yeah. What?
You make him sound like Bernie Sanders. Like he's basically a decent guy. Like he got caught up in the identity politics because of all of the people around him. I don't think Bernie Sanders is like a natural identity politician type.
No, he's not. He's old school labor.
Yeah, exactly, and he kind of ended up falling into it as well. And so you basically think that's the sort of thing with Pope Francis, right?
I think he's an old school Jesuit, and I think the Jesuits got. God, I hate the word cucked, but I'm going to use it. They got, let's say subverted. Let's say they were subverted first. And because of that, the Jesuit nature of trying to go along with the spirit of the times was then turned to purposes of what I would call near heresy. And because of that, a lot of people that shouldn't be in power are now in power at the upper levels of the Vatican, and nobody knows exactly what to do about it. Currently, we're in the middle of a synod, I believe, that Pope Francis has called to determine how they're going to deal with the abuse of minors, which in my mind is a retcon of the problem to begin with. But, be that what it is. The conservative Catholics, along with the alt Catholics, if you want to call them that, are sort of waiting to scoff at the report that comes out of this, because I feel like we're going to get a lot of virtue signaling and nothing on how to actually reform what's going on.
So, I mean, it sounds like the progressives they've kind of won.
Hold on. There's hope. They don't have new priests.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the progressive communities don't generate vocations.
Yeah. So in 20 years' time, you might be able to wrest it back. But will it survive 20 years?
The progressives also can't cross bright lines. They tried to essentially get a de facto communion for the divorced at the Synod of the Family in 2015. They were totally unsuccessful to doing that because a bunch of other cardinals stood up and said, if you do this, it's schism. And nobody wanted to cross that line. And Catholics are terrified of schism, which is why we're the Catholic Church and not various different Protestant churches. All in schism from each other.
Yep.
And a threat of a schism is enough to shut down a conversation of this order. But as long as the doctrine isn't changed, the church limps on. The church limps on, then there's a chance that this can be undone by the Pope after Francis. There's also a chance that the CDF, aka the Inquisition, is just going to rubber room Francis and run a reform of the church. I think that's an incredible outside possibility. The idea of it ever happening after the Council of Trent, aka after the Middle Ages, seems to me to be almost unheard of. But one can hope that forces outside of Francis will take over and start blowing in the right direction, the one that will actually get reform in the church and not continue down the path that everybody knows is going to lead to schism or the destruction of the Catholic Church as a progressive body that can't do anything but just be a mouthpiece of liberalism, of progressivism.
Mouthpiece of fucking Islam at the way it's going, mate. But no,
Yeah, well,
seriously, I'm genuinely concerned about this, and this is why I've been quite excited to talk to you about all this. Because I mean, I don't know any of these details, and obviously, I'm not like pro-Catholic Church, but I'm pro the Catholic Church being the thing it wants to be. And like but like freely associating. I mean, if like with Muslims in their own country, if you want to be like ultra Islamist, okay, I'm not going to complain, but just not in my country. You've got your own country for that. You live how you want to live, And the same with Catholic beliefs. If you guys want to be as Catholic as possible and complain about heresy, I don't mind, as long as it doesn't have to affect me. But then when I see something like that, no matter how I feel about the Catholic Church, it's still a venerable organisation that's had a massive impact on world history and probably should be treated with some respect. And then you see progressives running going, by the way, gays aren't going to hell. There might not be a hell. Just what are you doing? Stop it. It's disrespectful. That's how I look at it. It's disrespectful.
In an ideal world, the Catholic Church would be the cultural antibodies that confront the shifts to the cultural left that have gone on, and would create essentially a continuous pushback such that, well, if the countries worked the way, say, Thomas Jefferson imagined, there probably would be a Catholic contingent that would push back against the progressive. And I really do think SJWs, they're a Christian heresy, but they would push back against the Christian heresy of social justice. And then society, due to the equal and opposite reaction, would be forced into liberalism as the only default, right? And that's, I'm sure, what Thomas Jefferson imagined. I'm sure that's what Adam Smith and English Whigs in the 19th century imagined. But right now, the Catholic Church is not in a position to be those cultural antibodies. And I think what's happening is that the larger cultural problems that exist both in the church and in the West are becoming manifest in a way that's really, really hard to ignore.
I agree. I mean, we've like the Protestant church in this country is dead. It's just a landowning skeleton at this point. Like,
hey, you still have Peter Hitchens.
Yeah, exactly. He's like the one guy who still goes. Like, no, seriously, and I'm not joking, right? 6% of the population attends church regularly. 6%. And it's like, holy. I mean, yeah. I mean, as an atheist, I'm sat there thinking, well, I don't care. It doesn't affect me or anything. And if people don't want to, they don't have to. But there's also the sort of, the religious types are probably looking for religion elsewhere. And if they were going to choose a religion while living in this country, I would rather them choose Protestantism than not.
I'm telling you, I think atheist liberals, they need to have Catholicism as part of the cultural ecosystem. It's like a predator, right? You kill off all the wolves, and you're going to get an overpopulation of the things the wolves hunted, right?
I'm not even disagreeing with you. There are a lot of people who are atheists and call themselves cultural Christians, because at the end of the day, it is a culture. It is a cultural inheritance. It is basically part of Western values. I mean, there are not values. I don't want to say that because that makes it sound like we can only derive from God. But there's a cultural heritage there that it's imbued all around us. We look at the architecture we use and lots of the turns of phrases we use, and you can't really extract it. I mean, I still say, "Oh my God," when I'm surprised about something. So I don't want to sit here and deny the contributions that Christianity had to Western culture or anything. And,
well, I think Jordan Peterson's got a good take on this, right? When he said, I know we're changing topics here a little bit, but he said that the West is in search of some metaphysical super narrative, right? And in medieval times, the metaphysical super narrative was the church. In modern times, and I consider modernity, or I should say, perhaps pre-pure modernity, the space between medieval times was really the Reformation. The church became one voice among many, but the biggest one. And now what we have is a complete cultural vacuum. And everyone knows that if they can get control over the grand cultural narrative, they can call what they think is good, good, and what they think is bad, bad. And they essentially get to redesign politics in their own image. And that's what essentially the SJWs are contending for. They're not trying to become the new dominant party. They're trying to become the new Catholic Church. Or they're trying to become what the Catholic Church was in the Middle Ages. The only voice of a metaphysical super narrative that exists inside the civilization.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think people forget is that, in the past few hundred years, the church has been an insufferable entity in society, but it hasn't been trying to destroy society. It wasn't trying to tear down everything, every standard. It was oppressive in many ways, but it's not the same as being destructive. And I think the progressives are genuinely destructive. I think socially and culturally.
They want to essentially tear down pillars of civilization, so that, because they think that what will come in the void of that will be better, because they have this utopian vision. But I would defend the Catholic Church historically, even.
Hang on a sec. Sorry, it's not just that. I think they see any kind of standard as an oppressive thing because not everyone will meet it. I think that's what it is.
Well, yes, but in this, you sort of come to how essentially the SJW is. Oh man, I'm going to get some pushback for this. In some way, the SJW is the ultimate consequence of Protestantism and Martin Luther. Like, because it started with the Catholic Church going like, of course you're free to be as Catholic as you want, right? And we're not gonna force you to be a nun or a monk, but at the same time, society will be set up because we decide what's good and what's bad, and it's the freedom is the freedom to obtain higher virtues, higher communion with God. The Reformation was like, voice. Let's deconstruct that. What?
The hegemonic moral voice of society,
Yeah, but once you get rid of that, though, because everything that we've done in the Enlightenment presupposed that there would be a hegemonic moral voice that existed inside the culture, implicitly behind the scenes. But once you deconstruct that cultural voice further and further and further and further, you're left with a total void, and nobody has any idea of what a standard could be.
Well, no, it's up for grabs.
So you go from an explicit cathedral, as Mencius Moldbug would put it, to it slowly being cut back to where there's now a vacuum. And it seems that, well, the vacuum has to be filled by something.
It's actually, I think it's like free market morality almost.
Yeah, man, it's a multi-moral society, and I think that has a lot of problems.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, that's one of the problems of mass immigration. And just in case anyone was wondering, yes, Pope Francis is for mass immigration, specifically of refugees from Islamic countries. But I completely agree with you. One of the problems that I think we're having with these people is the fact that their moral systems are different to our moral systems. They're very honor-based, they're very familial, and Western cultures just aren't like that. And so they don't understand the kind of standards that they're operating to. And so these communities end up effectively like two swords going against each other or something. I mean,
Islam is a strange beast because it's almost like, it's strange because the mistakes of Islam were far prior, obviously, to the Reformation, right? Absolutely. But what eventually emerges from progressive Christianity is all mercy and no judgment. And what Islam is, it's almost like all judgment, no mercy. And in some sense, it feels like, from a Catholic point of view, Islam and the SJWs look like dragons of ice and fire going around devouring things that they're equal and opposite to each other. But because they're separated from any kind of organization that can bring them together into something, aping the Aristotelian mean or some kind of spiritual wisdom, they're just totally rampant.
I mean, God, do you think that, that's kind of implying that there might be a progressive melding of Islam and Catholicism if they break down the borders between them, and it would fit the sort of mindset that they operate by.
Right now what we're looking at is a progressive Islam merger.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
But the funny thing is that everyone involved in that merger thinks that they are going to be the one that just devours the other one. It's not really like progressives and Muslims aren't sitting out and working out their differences. They're like, let's politically coalition together so that we can defeat our adversaries, and then we'll have peace. And secretly behind each person's back, the progressives are like, we're totally going to cuck you when you make this alliance. And Islam is like, well, by that time we'll be the majority in half these countries. Good luck doing that. And so each of the sides thinks that it's going to come out on top. But I sense that in progressive circles, there is a hunger for some kind of narrative that has actual rules, that has actual standards. And in Islam, there's a hunger for a universalism and a cultural triumph, a cultural success that really only progressives have been dominating for the last 50 years.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think there's definitely. I mean, it's interesting listening to progressive Muslims and how the ideologies have points of intersection, and they know automatically where to bend on the contradictions. Like the sort of victimhood narrative, it's very prominent in a lot of sort of Muslim rhetoric and a lot of feminist rhetoric, obviously. You see these sort of things melding together. And I think that the progressives think that they can co-opt Islam, and it might be that they can. You know, I think that we should not underestimate them at all, given how much they've managed to co-opt so far. And is that cutting out on my
Pretty
end?
horrifying.
Ah, right. Sorry, that was my end that cut out there, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Sorry, yeah.
to my mind, can you hear me?
Yeah. The last thing I said was I wouldn't underestimate the SJWs and the progressives. I think that Islam might not be ready for them, but
Yeah, that's a possibility. But to my mind, what could come out of it is the worst aspect of both. I mean,
yeah, good.
Islam, I mean, maybe I'm just a pessimist here, right? But the one thing that Islam and progressivism do have in common is this sort of Hegelian view of the universe, where you've got the good side, and the only reason bad things happen is that the good people, the proletariat, the people of color, the Ummah, is oppressed by the bad people, the bourgeoisie, the white people, the kafir. And all of history is simply the good people slowly getting political power over the bad people. I mean, that's the common narrative between them. And if that's essentially what they're making hay off of, what could emerge from an Islam progressive merging is a violent form of progressivism that has an explicit notion of taqiyya.
Well, just to reinforce that point, actually. So I've been researching a video on the definition of Islamophobia in what the British police are using, just to try and figure out what actually they think Islamophobia is. And it took me a long time to find a definition from the Met, which is the London Police. And they don't have a definition for it on their website, even though they use the term. But I managed to find some paper, I can't remember where it came from now, but it was from 2013. It had an 8-point definition of Islamophobia, and one of the points was just having a negative opinion of Islam was Islamophobic, and that could mean that it was a hate crime if you said something about that on the internet. But I was reading through a bunch of other definitions, like a bunch of quite famous progressive Muslim academics. And, you know, naturally they've written loads of papers and books and all that. And so I was reading their definitions, and essentially their definitions were to deliberately define out of Islam, outside of being a Muslim, anyone who has committed an act of terror. So the very moment one commits an act of terror, they cease to become being a Muslim. So if, 10,000 Muslims a day might get radicalized to commit an act of terror, but not one of them, that's not Islam's fault, because not one of them remains a Muslim as soon as they pull the trigger. So
you see that retroactive changing of definitions to change the standard is actually something highly uncharacteristic of Islam and highly characteristic of progressivism.
Exactly.
And it actually, to tell you the truth, is kind of quote unquote scary jihadism is. It's that changing definitions constantly that really scares me.
Yeah, me too.
And the idea that you could get a merger between Islam that learns this cool new trick of changing your definitions to get what you want politically, that merged with a younger population of more motivated people is what's really scary.
Yeah, because you see translated videos from the Middle East, then I can only assume the translations are accurate. But you've got guys in thobes, I think they're called, with huge beards, and they're banging the table, going, "No, we are a violent religion. Why are they saying we are not?" And it's like, well, yeah, why wouldn't you have these? They don't have political correctness. Why wouldn't they embrace the masculine, aggressive, lesser jihad of Islam? Why wouldn't they do this? What's preventing?
And that's classically Islam has been very honest about that.
Absolutely.
And there's people have said, like, taqiyya, that this is how Islam presents itself. Taqiyya has been a smaller part of Islam. And to the extent that there is deception going on in modern Islamic communities, I think it has much less to do with the minor principle of taqiyya and much more to do with progressivism trying to retcon everything into its own narrative.
Oh, yes. And they're not shy. One thing that's been going around today was a clip from an audience debate on a TV program we have in here in the UK called BBC's Newsnight, and a white man had said something about racism. Oh, Britain's one of the least racist countries in the entire world, and there was a Muslim woman on there with a hijab, and she starts yelling at him, "Well, what would you know as a white man?" Blah blah blah. And it's she's millennial progressive, and she reeks of middle class progressivism, but just wearing a hijab, and that's it. It's that we very much have a Western progressive SJW style version of Islam, and I think that eventually it's going to be transmitted back to the Middle East, and they're going to hate it too.
Well, I don't know. Like, my worry is that Islam is very good at. Islam is very good at recognizing power grabs and appeasing them in a way that Christianity just isn't. Just to go back to what we were talking about previously, the Catholic Church lost one of the richest countries in all of the world and would in short order become the richest country in the entire world, Great Britain, because it wouldn't let a king get a divorce. Okay, like, stubborn doctrinal differences, because that is, at the end of the day, the Catholic Church sees itself as a moral institution first and a political one second. I don't think that would have ever happened in Islam. I can't imagine Islam taking that kind of hit to its influence over a point of doctrine. And so I think that, I don't know if Muslims are going to be as disturbed by white progressivism as Christianity is. Christianity, this SJW stuff, it's designed to exploit, it's evolved to parasite off of explicitly Christian over moralistic sentiment. I don't know if it can really tap into anything when it goes to the Middle East, and it's very likely that Islam will just incorporate its ability to manipulate language.
Well, I agree, and this is actually the thing that scares me the most, because they're going to create a progressive version of Islam, and I think it's going to proliferate for exactly the reason you say, because Islam is adaptable. Because the thing is, Islam, like, the main principle being there is only one God and Muhammad being his prophet, right? That's the unchangeable. There is only one interpretation of that. It's a categorical statement. You can't interpret it as if Muhammad's a deity or anything like that. Everything else is down for interpretation, and they'll use postmodernism to do it. And don't get me wrong, it might create less jihadis, but my God, it's probably going to ruin Islam. I think that this is a kind of ideological poison, to be honest.
I don't know. The thing is that what I've become convinced of is that there are an infinite number of ways you could get super, I don't want to say pathological, super rampant, aggressive, and anti-human ideologies develop in the future. I think the question is just how do we construct a humane and what I would ask for would be spiritually aware view of the world, like which existed in the Western world in the ideal form, of course. For I would say 2,000 years, I would say 1,500 years, perhaps you would say 300. But at any rate, how do you construct that humane order? Because I could imagine all sorts of terrible things. In many ways, I could imagine something worse than Islam coming out of the swirl of postmodernity that we see, or the maelstrom of postmodernity that we have before us.
There's a horrible creeping part of me that is becoming, I don't know, more convinced that essentially progressivism is like, I don't know, liberalism's antibodies.
Oh, yeah, it is. Well, I mean, progressivism is progressivism. I would say progressivism essentially is it's sort of like lupus. Lupus, like when the antibodies get so aggressive, they start attacking healthy
Yeah,
tissue.
yeah. That's a great.
Yeah.
Yes, that's. I was thinking of a Star Trek analogy actually from an episode, but like there's it's definitely attacks its own body, and it just attacks everything, and it's very aggressive, but it does pacify things.
Yeah, well, I mean, what it does, though, I mean, and this is the sort of thing, like, progressivism deconstructs all power relationships.
Yeah,
But the problem is that in order to deconstruct, it needs to have power. So it's constantly inventing these reasons where it can excuse its own power while still keeping the deconstruction apace. The difficulty is that at some point, it's going to destroy any power structure that it can live in.
absolutely.
And the whole body of the civilization is just going to die because there's going to be no institution that will be able to do anything.
Oh, absolutely, and it becomes increasingly puritanical and self-destructive as it just chews up the resources of any institution. I mean, like, think about some of the get woke, go broke stuff. Like some of the businesses that social justice is ruining are just colossal institutions, like Marvel Comics.
Sure, but
you
what
couldn't have
happens?
done that,
Yeah, that's huge. But what happens when Western civilization gets woke and grows broke?
Well, yeah, that's
Right.
exactly.
I mean,
that's exactly
what happens
we're living on
is
borrowed time with it.
yeah, what happens is
It's cutting out again. God damn it.
absolute societal devastation. It's the loss of knowledge. It's the dehumanization of humanity. And this is, I mean, if you look back to medieval authors who experienced chaotic times in a much more short order, people writing in the Middle Ages where, society had just come out of the fall of Rome or I mean, they're a few hundred years away, but still, right? Yeah. Like they knew what chaos was. And Dante and Boethius, who was much earlier, they knew that the worst thing is a society, a civilizational order that's collapsing, because essentially guarantees cannot be made for anyone's safety.
That's exactly true, and I genuinely think that the progressives are effectively like the moral system of communism. The actual real form of communism, where there's no state, no hierarchy, no property, no nothing. It's just people living in the Garden of Eden again.
Don't you hate that when people, like, I'm sorry, I saw one of your debates recently with somebody who did the whole, like, this line, you get this all the time, like, cultural Marxism can't exist because Marxism was an economic theory. You get that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, it irritates me. Like, it's technically true, right? But it so thoroughly misses the point, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, like what we mean, obviously it's not classical Marxism, but the idea that we're worried about carrying through is the dialectical materialist view of the world, where we reconstruct history in terms of power relationships and then retell the history of the world as being the struggle of the good group to seize power away from the bad group. That's what we're worried about. And if that element of Marxism is exported into a cultural context, it's still bad.
Yes, and it very clearly has been, and that's what I was trying to explain during the debate. In fact, I mean, as you have clearly explained here, it's obvious that these are just destructive methods in order to achieve the end goal of having zero hierarchy, zero difference, no classes, that's the point. And they're very open about this. They want to get rid of they want social justice. We want men and women to be equal. Oh my God, what does that mean? What are you saying? But yeah, I am genuinely worried about the dangers of it, because like saying it's like this is like the morality of the sort of the quote unquote real communism. Do you even want to be that kind of person? Because I've been thinking about this a lot. 'Cause, character comes from adversity and all that sort of thing. I mean, future man could be an insufferable prick that you would not want to spend any time with, a tremendously selfish crybaby who's more progressive than progressives. And I mean, you wouldn't choose that future for yourself, so why would you choose it for your children?
I mean, that's sort of the thing, right? I mean, the real danger, aside from the momentary political adversaries that we have is that technology gets to the point where people don't need each other anymore. And so they start developing these pathological personality traits that make organization and socialization totally impossible. That we essentially just grow up as adult toddlers and never learn how to share or do anything together.
Yeah.
That seems like hell to me.
Same here. Honestly, and I can't not see that as how the future is heading.
That's worse than Islam, way worse.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. That's honestly, that's kind of why I'm worried about progressivism literally poisoning everything. Because if you've got this movement that is inherently deconstructive, then anything. I mean, like I don't like Islam's politics, but that doesn't mean I don't look at a mosque and go, wow, that's an incredible piece of architecture, or the calligraphy and go, wow, that's beautiful to look at. It's it's not that I don't respect the fact that they have a history and tradition and a culture that has its own internal logic, and it's the same with the Catholic Church, it's the same with Judaism, it's the same with all these things. I like I hate to say the word diversity. I like the fact that these things exist, but I also recognize that in order for something to exist, it has to be essentially constructed moment to moment by a series of actions, and the actions have to have particular standards and intentions behind them to give the thing the character that it has. Otherwise, it's not that thing. And so this is why, weirdly, I'm really focused on the culture of it. I find culture really fascinating. Why, think what people do and why they do it. And so when I watch this movement, it's just, we will get rid of everything, and it's like, why? This is the interesting stuff in the world, you wankers.
Well, I mean, this is sort of, it has to do with a progressive vision, but in many ways, the reason why it's so effective is because in the we're going to erase all human distinction camp, you can both fit progressive socialist interests and corporate interests.
Oh yeah.
And so the progressives have a funding source, and the Chinese government too, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the Chinese government at this point, it's communist, it's also corporatist.
It is.
And go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting that they've actually got a revolt of Marxist students in China now because the Chinese government's too capitalist.
Have you heard what the Chinese government's doing to its Uyghur Muslim population?
Oh, the concentration camps and re-education camps. Yes, I have.
I don't know how much of it to believe, frankly, but it sounds horrific.
I can believe they'd do it.
Oh yeah,
that's the
kind
thing.
of
And it's the same within Burma at the moment, isn't it? The ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya. And I mean, I've been researching about this, man, and there's a documentary, I think it was Vice that went there, with this, he was on the cover of Time magazine, the Buddhist Bin Laden or something they called him, and he was basically saying that it would be preferable to ethnically cleanse the Rohingya, who are Muslims, because since the British withdrew from the area, they've had nothing but terrorism from these people, and in his words, quote, they won't live in peace. And so he's pro-ethnic cleansing. And then you just kind of fall back into Hitchens' Islam has bloody borders. And so, well, that's true. And so, they don't care about human rights, obviously, and I do, obviously. But it's not like you can say, well, don't be silly, Islam did do nothing wrong. Because, what's your counter?
Well, I mean, it's an aggressive beast, right?
Oh, absolutely. If I was going to design an ideology to help me conquer, it would look a lot like Islam.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's oftentimes like Islam is pretty on the nose, right? About you used an adjective to describe it that I've currently become my favorite word to describe Islam. It can be honorable, it can be nefarious and treacherous, but it is at all times imperious.
Yes.
And
every aspect
that is one thing.
Every aspect. It's religious supremacy.
Yeah, it's religious supremacy. Well, I mean, it will share power. That's one thing. Supremacy is kind of a word for me. For me, imperiousness nails it a lot better, and I'm really glad you used that word. I can't remember when you used it, but imperious nails it because Islam will share power when it has to.
Oh yeah. What I meant was the goal. The goal is religious supremacy, but sharing power is the means to the end.
At all times, it doesn't really have charity. It just has magnanimity, right? So it's very hard to come up against an Islam that behaves, say, for instance, like a Christianity would behave or like a Buddhism behaves. And because of that, I think it is a little bit, if you were just to characterize religious behavior, I'd say Islam is a little bit of a black sheep in terms of how it sociologically behaves.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear to anyone listening who might be quite progressive themselves. When we say this, we're not saying they're doing anything wrong.
No.
You know, that's we're not saying they're chopping off heads or anything like this. They are just trying to effectively impose moral standards on, you know, just inside their own communities and outside. You know, this isn't violent or necessarily aggressive, but it's active.
I mean, I admire it, to be quite honest. Like, I have been frankly, I think that this idea of the Ummah and this idea of the civilizational superstructure that Islam has as so central to its existence is in many ways what's been missing from what I would call Christendom. And I wish in some sense, and I think that it might be the only way, is to reestablish, if not the religion proper of Christianity, which I still devoutly hope for, if not that, then some concept of Christendom as it exists as a larger civilizational force. And I think, because I think that's what's missing when we talk about the West. We talk about the West as if it were an economic sphere, but it's not an economic sphere. It's a sphere. It's a sphere of cultural values, and it's a sphere of shared history more than anything else. And I think that this is what's missing from people like EU bureaucrats.
I can see the argument. I definitely can, and again, this it's no surprise that this isn't something that the progressive class would like, because you're delineating a boundary. You're actually creating a positive identity. You're creating a way of resisting what they're trying to do. So it's natural that we're never going to get that while they're the ones calling the shots. I mean, I'm obviously suspicious about the kind of nature that such a construct would take on, but I mean, I can't inherently object to the idea. Like, of course there is something we would call Christendom. They did all through the Middle Ages. You know, our societies came out of that. It's archaic and not useful now, but, well, like, you know, not useful.
So I wonder if it is.
Yeah,
right?
I'll take that back. I'm not saying it was not useful, but it's abstractly useful. So,
I mean, we've been deconstructing Christendom since the Reformation.
Yeah,
and making it more personal. Now, I think that, you know, when the West was essentially dominating the world, it was tempting to believe that the cultural dispositions of Christendom were just universally present aspects of human conscience. But I don't think that's the case. I think that there's a lot of evidence to say that it's distinctly not the case. So in the absence of Western sensibilities being radically universalizable without some huge cultural conversion, what is the option for a world order that is not just we're gonna melt everything down, like apparently EU bureaucrats believe, or George Soros might believe? I don't know. I'm speculating. But.
Well, I know George Soros genuinely believes that the refugees aren't the problem; the borders are the problem, in his words. So yeah, they would liquidate the structures of our countries.
And once you have everyone in a country, the only common denominator is market forces and social programs, and you get like a Walmartization of all culture, and this creates a huge problem for people who want to essentially escape from the corporate government. I sound like Alex Jones, the corporate government globalist. And between sounding like a Warhammer 40k Space Marine and Alex Jones, I will just risk it and say what I mean. Yeah, I mean, they essentially want to deracinate world culture, and to my mind, that is something that we need to resist.
I would definitely focus on the cultural aspect of anything, because I think that's the direct thing that people are encountering, and I think that changes. I mean, people can change over their lifetimes depending how they feel about things. So, but I tell you what, I love the idea of kind of mingling in some Catholic theology into the war against the progressives. I can definitely see a kind of Warhammer 40k sort of Catholic meme going. I would probably enjoy it even as an atheist, you know. And but the thing is, like, it's honestly at this point, right? I've been thinking, I've been thinking this so much because, like, the problem is moral force, and it's always been moral force throughout everything, throughout all of history. I'm so sick of progressives going, let me tell you this study. It's like, bitch, that is not going to change anyone's mind, because fundamentally, from a moral point of view, they have a different worldview to you, and they don't agree with what you want. So no matter how many studies you present to them, they might all be 100% true, but at the end of the day, if you're saying let refugees into your country, they're going to be like, well, no, I don't want that. You know, you don't tell me about the economy.
What's funny?
Yeah, go on.
To sort of, I'm not going to not counter some, but we were both involved in this sort of alt-right progressive discussion for a little bit, and I've been able to facilitate some debates, and a lot of times neither party wants to walk into the same room together. But so I've been left sort of privately interviewing them. And the first question I ask, and they always want to go and they want to debate like race realism, like, differences in intelligence and behavior between races. And I personally have no idea whether it's true or not. I'm not an expert. But you just ask them to go to your point, Sargon. You go and ask them, both sides. Ask them this question first and foremost. You go to an alt-righter and say, if race realism wasn't true and the qualities of the races were uniformly distributed genetically, would you still want immigration of third worlders and Muslims into Europe? And then you go to the progressive and you go, if race realism was true and there were differences in the distribution of genes in between populations, would that mean you would abandon your commitment to egalitarianism and a common global world order? Both sides say no. So why are they debating this fact?
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the fact. Yep. It has everything to do with the moral position they take about the fact.
That's exactly it, and that's exactly what I was getting to. It's like we need to be able to make a moral argument for anything, really. I mean, and then I've watched Jeremy Corbyn just beat the crap out of Theresa May with sort of just a little grandstanding, and then Theresa May, she never, or at least very rarely, ever comes back with a moral position of her own. She just tries to appease Jeremy Corbyn, so she's constantly dancing to his tune. And so it's infuriating to watch. And I'm not like, she's supposed to be some sort of high Tory or something. And I'm just looking at her thinking, God, she's awful. And again, I want her to be the conservative that she says she is. Not just for me, but because, there are going to be people who are relying on her to be that. She's the bloody Prime Minister. So again, it's just the abandonment of standards.
I mean, it's what Nassim Nicholas Taleb says about skin in the game, and this is something you get from a lot of Republicans, but I notice it very distinctly in EU countries. Does UK count anymore? But very distinctly in EU politicians, no skin in the game. No skin in the game. That's why people want nationalism, is because you get the sense that the people who are making the decisions aren't directly invested in the consequences that flow from those decisions. Merkel's the prime example. I'm sure Theresa May is in a somewhat similar position, but you could probably correct me on UK politics. I claim absolutely no knowledge about that.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in this idea of like a sort of a modern, edgy version of Catholicism. I find that very entertaining, and I could definitely ironically enjoy that.
Well, we have a lot of house cleaning to do in the Catholic Church, and I wish I could tell you what's going to happen, Sargon, but I can't.
Of course not.
Right now, like on a daily basis, the things I said were rumors in the stream. Like, I hope I pointed all the things out that were rumors and distinguished them from facts. But these things, like the Vigano accusations, changing daily. People stepping forward to vindicate, people stepping forward to deny, and everyone's constantly changing positions. So the situation's so dynamic that I don't honestly know what's going to come out of this.
Man, I tell you what, you'll have to let me know in like 6 months' time or something. Like, we'll have to do another one of these, and you can catch me up.
One more thing I wanted to bring up, a book that I thought was really interesting about this whole future of the world, and this is something to bring up to your alt-right friends when you see them. The most interesting book that I'm currently reading right now on the subject of the stuff we're talking about, globalism versus particularism, all that has come out of Israel. Specifically a book called The Virtue of Nationalism by Yoram Hazony.
Right.
Now, I think Jordan Peterson, I think he's thinking in the right direction. He's addressing the problems we're mentioning, but it's just there's not enough of him. And he's not willing to take risks, right? He's kind of a play it safe kind of guy, although he's asking the right questions.
Well, a lot of the alt-right do kind of venerate Israel in a way, actually.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that I think that look at Israel, look at Poland, look at Hungary. There's a possibility for an alternative intellectual tradition to come out of these countries. They've gotten off of the bandwagon of globalism, and I think they're going to be searching for ways to conceptualize nationhood and modernity that's apart from the vision that George Soros has. They have to.
Well, I've actually been thinking a lot about that myself. Again, I know, God, I keep saying that, but it's true, because all of these things are like, they're part of the same problem. And so I'm thinking a lot about this sort of stuff Bannon's been saying in his interviews, because he's been doing a lot of interviews in enemy territory recently.
I've totally missed them.
Oh my God, you should check them out. They're amazing, right?
I'll definitely do that.
Oh yeah, pick any one of them, because he's great at dealing with the progressive media, and he's been really handing it to them. Because they basically want to portray him as a Nazi, and effectively he says nationalist, but I think what he means is kind of localist. And I've been reading a lot of English philosophy recently, actually, and I read Roger Scruton's Where We Are, and he basically describes what I would call like the localist sort of movement, where it's like the identity isn't abstract in the nation, it's in the locale in which you stay, the community of which you're a part, the people, and it's about feeling like you belong somewhere. It's not that you can just move anywhere and everything's the same for you. It's that this is a particular area and it's unique in and of itself, and you belong in that area. And this is, I think, what Bannon is speaking to, just in a coarse American way.
Roger Scruton called it oikophilia, the love of home.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
And I do think it's important. I am a localist, but I think Jordan Peterson is right. In addition to oikophilia, or I think oikophilia is the right word.
No,
in addition to that, there also needs to be a common moralistic civilizational language that spreads further across the world. And I'd really like it if that language was not Salafist Islam or intersectional progressivism. Thank you very much.
I agree. I mean, the thing is, I'm going to get it in the neck from the atheist community now, saying, "What? How could you sit there talking with a Catholic about how it would be better to have Catholic moralism, which we spent so much time getting out from under, than it would be to be a feminist, intersectional Islamic moralism?" And honestly, that's the point. That's as far as you've driven me. I would I would rather make common cause with the Catholics, because they have skin in the game. That's what it is.
Well, some of us do. I feel at the low point of my ability. When I started my YouTube channel, I thought for sure that the John Paul II vision was the vision that would provide that very moral vision for Western civilization. Right now, we've got a whole laundry list of things to clean up in the church, and I probably will get shit for airing all this out on stream. But I think it just needs to be said. Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I if you heard the author Slavoj Zizek said something along the lines of Catholicism is at its best when it's being itself. You may want to live in a liberal world, but I think that liberalists or liberals, if they think about it, you need an ecosystem. I'm not so sure that a liberal order is possible anymore. I've been skeptical about that. But if it is possible, I think you want a diversity of voices to form the ecosystem that was envisioned by the founding fathers, where these forces are pushing against each other in a public square.
Yes. The way I would describe it is I want a liberal political order, and then I want... it's still a liberal social order, but within the social sphere, I'm very happy for there to be strong, moralistic, pro-Western is maybe that's pro heritage, maybe.
Well, I mean, your vision is, I totally understand your vision, because your vision is the vision of the West in the 19th century. Right,
yeah, kind of,
post-Enlightenment. This is the vision. Yeah. The problem is that I feel that there are some distinct problems in the 19th century that were brought up by people like Nietzsche,
of course,
and that were re-upped by people in the existentialist movement that were never properly addressed by pure liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that Jordan Peterson is right when he says what the Jungian philosophy was a way to partially address that. But I think that there's a whole intellectual path that just was totally ignored post World War II. I think there was a Catholic intellectual path that was totally ignored that was anti-Enlightenment. And I think that there was a pro-Enlightenment intellectual path that was just totally not explored. And it lies somewhere beyond what Jordan Peterson is talking about. I don't know what that is, but there are questions there that just have not been answered.
Would you like to give people an example?
Well, I mean, constructing, you say like pro-heritage, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, a pro-heritage is really important, but how do you hold a pro-heritage view in line with a liberalism that thrives on deconstructing elements of personal constraint? I mean, a classic example of this, and I know this is going to draw fire, but let's just take a recent development that we all hate, like this whole protected classes thing. Like African Americans are protected class, women are protected class, and people are like, well, how did they think up of this? It's a conspiracy theory. It's cultural Marxism. Well, not to say that the Frankfurt School wasn't a thing. It certainly was, but the existence of protected classes owed to the fact that we needed to we wanted to deconstruct segregation. But once you make it illegal to discriminate, you have one of two options. You can completely destroy freedom of association by saying no one can discriminate for any reason, or you create categories.
Oh, goddamn. What is with my internet?
Apparatus around intersectional progressivism. And this is a question you have to ask yourself. If you're going to say you want ordered liberty, what is the narrative that orders liberty? And what is the part of the heritage that gets held up as sacred and unquestionable?
This is actually one of the reasons I've been going into English philosophy quite a lot recently, because it's weird. There's the moral good of the well-functioning state is something that very much comes across from like early 20th century English thinkers. It's very interesting because you can tell these are being presented in opposition to fascism, because obviously this would have been and socialism, of course, but like these have been stomping around the continent and the world for a period of time before the sort of like these people writing in like 1946 and stuff like this, and in 30s, and so I'm just like I think it was the Greek concept eunomia, I think it is, good governance, this sort of, and it's almost like the sort of the positive moralism of the moderate center, and it's and it's making a big song and dance and a big case for a sort of incrementalism, where
but and this is where I'm going to get. It was this very attempt that was critiqued by Nietzsche.
Right. Okay.
Now, you don't have to believe Nietzsche.
I can't stand reading Nietzsche, so I haven't. I actually just learn about his ideas from other sources.
He is pretentious. I mean, he does
the aphorisms. I can't do it. Just tell me what you mean, man.
He does. If you read him, he does remind you of that like goth kid in high school who like couldn't get laid and was writing things about how he was like this super sophisticated person that like all the Chads and Stacys wouldn't have anything to do with. Like he strikes you as that, but the guy, well,
I'm joking.
I actually don't know about Nietzsche's life. I wouldn't be. I know he was never married.
No, I don't think
he was never married. But if you get past Nietzsche's pretension, you'll see that the critiques he brings against the Enlightenment are very they need to be addressed.
Oh yeah. Now, fundamentally, why should we do any of this, right?
Yes, exactly. Right.
As I said, I can't stand to read. I'm actually that guy who read about a third of every Nietzsche book I picked up, and I think there's about 4 of them now, right? And I literally just got frustrated with how like challenging it was to read. It wasn't difficult to understand once you'd
No.
sat down and thought about it, but it was just so much work. I just thought, fuck it, I'll just get a bunch of YouTube videos and they can explain to me what he was saying, and then I'll take it from there because I'm a lazy shit. Sorry.
I couldn't get through Kant. I could. I mean, thus spoke Zarathustra. I mean, that kind of reads, doesn't it?
Again,
It's pretentious, but it reads.
I actually, the last time I tried reading that was about 24, and again, I got about a third of the way through. It was definitely past the Tightrope Walker. I can't.
Well, that's like the second chapter.
Yeah, no, I know, but there was some other thing. It was like 14 years ago. Give me a break.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. But that's the only thing I really remember. Is the little speech he gives after the Tightrope Walker falls down. That's the only thing I can really recall from it. But
I sympathize. I read Moby Dick like 14 years ago, and I can't remember anything about Moby Dick other than I thought it was great.
Really?
And also that Ishmael was probably autistic. But yeah.
Well, he can't let it go, can he?
No. Every time in Moby Dick, he segues away from the action to talk about his obsession with whaling. Yeah, total autist.
That's amazing.
But I can't remember anything else about the book or why I thought it was good because it was so long ago, you know.
But no, I agree with you, and I actually think I'm sure that the people I was reading are well aware of Nietzsche's criticism in this regard, and I think that, and it's never explicitly said this way or anything like that, but that was just the impression I got from it. There was the kind of, I don't know, I like a kind of, I think honestly, kind of like the Heinleinian Starship Troopers, the moral duty of being a citizen. You know what it means, as in you are actively partaking in the structure of the world, and you are being that part that is keeping the whole, like, is keeping Peterson's Dragon of Chaos at bay by tidying your room. You know, and so if everyone does this, suddenly we have a world full of tidy rooms. It's that kind of that kind of purpose is behind.
That's
it.
a good start. I just don't think it's a good end.
Well, I think that's because you're religious.
Right? Well, no, I mean it's not just that. I think there's questions that are just like, you know, we need to go a bit further, and I think this is a good place to end because we're probably entering in on time here. But I'll say this. I mean, I'm hoping that what we're about. I'm very pessimistic usually. I think we're all going to hell in a handbasket. Maybe that's because I'm Catholic, but maybe, right? Maybe we could be entering into a golden age of amateur academic thinking or amateur thinking in the public square. We have the technology. We have a real academy, a well-funded academy that is utterly hostile to new ideas and new thinkers and new voices, who is obsessed along one line of thinking and can't go anywhere else. And there are just going to be so many questions and so many ideas that have no home except among people who are amateurs. And my one hope is that we can bring something forth in this dimension that can be an actual source of new ideas for the civilization, perhaps.
Well, I think that's inevitable. I think the natural urge to have aspects of reality explained that are not currently being explained by the dominant paradigm is going to drive these things underground, and thank God for the internet. That's why they're coming for us, man.
I can't tell you how frustrated I get at people who think that a PhD gives you magical powers.
I've met Chris.
Like, no, I'm serious. I just finished my PhD dissertation. Yeah. It was a pain in the ass. It did not give me magical PhD powers. Like, I'm no smarter. I probably am stupider than I am than when I started it. So, like,
good job.
Yeah. No,
what did you do
I'm serious. Like, I'm not saying I didn't learn anything. I'm not saying that it's not helpful to my life in certain regards. But I can't imagine so much of academia is designed around these little markers that you've paid your price, that you walk the beat, so to speak, and that, you know, you're in the in crowd, and I think that's hampered it. I think that's hamstrung the entire debate we've had about ideas in the modern world, really, probably since the end of World War II.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll leave it there. But
okay,
because we are coming on time, and I'm getting a little tired now. But
oh no, I'm tired myself.
Yeah,
but thanks for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude or anything. It's like I travel a lot, and I've been waking up at like 4 a.m, and so it's nice to have like 3 hours in the morning before everyone, but it means I get kind of tired towards 10 o'clock at night.
No, I know. Like, I do conferences. Like, it drains you, man.
Yeah,
but hey, we'll have we'll have to catch up, right?
Oh.
If you ever want me to, make a video for your channel or do another live stream, you know where to get me, right?
Yeah, dude, absolutely. And we definitely will in like 6 months or however long until something important happens within the church. So I am very interested in hearing, because honestly, it sounds like Game of Thrones, progressive Game of Thrones in the Catholic Church.
It is kind. I mean, the Catholic Church is a monarchy. It's like that, right?
Yeah.
The politics are all loyalistic.
That's amazing. Honestly, it's really fascinating to hear.
Anyway, yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, Sargon. I'll catch you later. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'll leave a link to, if you want to send me a link to your channel, and I'll put it in the description of the video.
Oh yeah, sure thing. Should I send it via Skype?
Yeah, that's great, man. Cheers.
Okay, cool. Cheers.
All right,
Cheers.
bye.